Don't invite them. They're not our kind of people. Not in my league. That's what my mother said when I told her I wanted to invite my dad's side of the family for Thanksgiving. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't fumble or excuse herself. She said it clean and cold, and she meant it. I couldn't believe I'd heard her right, but I had. And with that one line, something that had been sealed in our family for 20 years began to split and open, the way a seam pops under too much strain. Truth has a sound like that when it starts to give. My name is Ainsley Ford. I'm 31. I live in New York City and work as a freelance translator. I rent a small studio above a deli that opens at 5. In the mornings, I grind coffee and let the kettle sing. I read the news from overseas. Around noon, I sit at my desk and open whatever manuscript or contract came in overnight. My days are quiet. Nobody knocks. I like it that way. Still, I know what sits under that silence. It has roots. It has weight. It grew out of loss and the long hush that followed after. My father died when I was 9. It was winter. No snow that day. The sky was flat and gray as a sheet of paper. On his way home from a job site, he was hit in traffic. He was a civil engineer. A steady man. He didn't talk much. He came home tired, but he always washed up and ate with us. He kept his hands busy when I did my homework at the kitchen table. Sometimes he built little bridges out of popsicle sticks and showed me how. Triangles made a structure hold. Sometimes he sharpened his drafting pencil and taught me how to make clean block letters, the way engineers write, all measured and square. I loved those quiet hours with him. No big speeches. Just the soft drag of pencil on paper and his small half smile. When I got the angle right, the night he died, my mother said nothing. Not on the drive back from the hospital. Not when we stepped into the house. Her hands were cold. His work jacket hung on the hook by the door, empty and neat, like a person who had just stepped outside for air. I stood there and stared at it and cried until my throat hurt. After that, our home became a place where we did not speak of my dad. It was a rule nobody wrote down. It was just how we lived. My mother, Margaret folks call her Maggie, was born into a Southern family that ran a small dress shop on a shady street in Charleston. She was raised on good posture and thank you notes. She ironed her jeans. She corrected grammar. After my dad died, she moved us back to New Jersey and opened a little boutique on Main Street. She sewed late. She took in hem after hem, pressed satin, pinned shoulders, stitched beads, kept the books, and watched the door all at once. She worked like a person who refused to drown. "I'm raising you on my own," she'd say. "Don't expect me to go easy." She didn't say it mean. She said it like a fact. Like weather. So I learned my job. My job was to do well. To make it easier, I brought home straight A's. Teachers praised me. Neighbors praised me. At family cookouts on my mother's side, aunts would say, "Isn't she something?" Mom would let the corners of her mouth lift and say, "As she should be." It was a smile from the mouth, not the eyes. When my father's relatives called the house, Mom never handed me the phone. "We're in the middle of something," she'd say. "I'll have her call back." She would set the receiver down with a small, hard click. That sound stayed with me more than any words. It filled the kitchen. It filled the space where my dad's name should have been. Even as a child, I could feel it, though I didn't have the right words. My mother was steering us away from my father's family. She was building a fence, and she meant for us to stay on one side. I didn't ask why. You know when something is sacred or dangerous without being told. Talking about my dad in front of my mom felt like touching a live wire. In 4th grade, our teacher gave us a writing prompt. "A memory of your father." I turned in a blank page. When she asked me why, I said, "I can't remember." It wasn't true. I remembered plenty. The way his boots sounded. The smell of his jacket. The steady feel of his hand on my shoulder when he leaned down to check my math. But saying any of that felt like breaking ranks. It felt like betrayal, and I was a good soldier. My mother did protect me. She was the one who ran to the pharmacy at midnight when I had a fever. She was the one who drove me to SAT prep. who sat up with me and researched colleges, who found every scholarship form and highlighted the parts I needed to fill out. She gave me everything she had, but she treated my father like a ghost that better not be named. When I left for college and moved into a dorm in the city, the rules loosened, not because she let them, but because I wasn't under the same roof. I began collecting my father's traces. An old shoebox of photos hidden in a hall closet. A stack of holiday cards with familiar signatures from aunts and uncles I hardly knew. A return address in central Pennsylvania for my grandparents. The Fords, his parents, people I had been cut off from. I sent an email. I waited. Then, one by one, messages trickled back. Cousins I'd never met. An uncle named Ray. A woman named Hannah who said she had pictures of my dad. From when he was lanky and 20 and so full of life, you could see it in his grin. We met a few times, tentative at first. They turned out to be warm and plain-spoken. No fancy airs. They hugged like they meant it. "We're just glad you came," Uncle Ray said the first time I stepped through his door. It tilled a part of me that had gone hard. I felt something sway and settle inside. Oh, I thought, I am theirs too. I belong to this branch. I didn't tell my mother. I told myself it was because I wanted to be sure, or because bringing it up would only pick a fight. But if I'm honest, I was scared. I could hear the words she'd use. Don't get involved with those people. And I could already feel myself shutting down in reply. Going back to the quiet daughter who nodded and said nothing. I didn't want to go back. So I walked a line. I kept my balance. I didn't lean too hard toward one side or the other. That balance held for a while. Then a single sentence broke it. Those people aren't in my world. At the time, I didn't know that line would pull up everything I'd buried. Anger, yes, but also a deep, painful doubt I had never named. I didn't know it yet. I just felt something give. By then, I had started visiting my dad's family once a month. I told my mother I had a research interview for a translation project and wouldn't be able to stop by her place. I took the train from Penn Station out to Harrisburg, then a local bus that rattled along 2-lane roads. The city fell away. Warehouses gave way to barns. The land opened. On those rides, my breath came easier. Fields rolled out in old greens and browns. There were white houses with black shutters and front porches deep enough for a swing. Corn rustled. Wind chimes knocked a gentle clink-clink on back decks. Out there, time had a different sound. My grandparents' old farmhouse sat at the bend of a narrow road. The clapboard paint had peeled in places, but the place was kept. A screened porch ran along the front, and someone. Grandma Ruth had lined the bench with hand-stitched cushions, faded and soft. When I came up the steps, Uncle Ray would push the door open and boom, "Well, look at you. Ainsley, you been eatin'? You look all city thin." I'd laugh and say I was fine, and then he'd fill my plate anyway. Cousins slid dishes my way. Homemade pickles, a crock of beans, slices of pot roast you could cut with a spoon. Nobody quizzed me. Nobody fished for gossip about my mom. We just talked. About weather. About jobs. About someone's truck that wouldn't start and the neighbor's dog. That had finally stopped digging under the fence. I loved those hours more than I knew how to say. There was a live, warm thread in those conversations. It felt like blood recognizing blood. It felt like someone put a chair at a table and said, "This seat has been yours all along. Sit. Eat. Tell us about your day." One afternoon, I stood by the mantel where Grandma Ruth's urn sat beside a framed picture of her smiling into the sun. I bowed my head, just a moment. Uncle Ray slid open a hall closet and pulled down an old photo album with a cracked spine. We set it on the dining table and opened it slow. There he was, my dad, young and lean on a motorcycle, laughing into the wind. There he was on a job site, hard hat tilted back, dirt on his cheekbones, wary as sip comet. There he was, holding me as a newborn, his big hands careful, his eyes soft, as if he couldn't quite believe I was real. I touched the edge of that page and spoke to him without moving my lips. "Dad, I'm doing okay. I'm still your girl. I'm still here." Memories I'd shoved into the far corners of my mind came out into the light. That restless fear of not belonging, not to any side, loosened a little. Something melted and ran off like snow. And still, when I went back to the city, I slid the copies I'd made of those photos into a manila envelope and tucked it at the back of a drawer where my mother would never find it. I sat on my bed. I listened to the traffic move under my window. I tried to name what I was afraid of. Was I afraid of losing my mother? Of her turning cold to me? Was I afraid that if I claimed my father's people, I would be betraying her? Or betraying him by staying quiet? I didn't know. I only knew that, once again, I chose silence. And silence, if you lean on it long enough, becomes a wall you can't see over. It was always going to crack. In October of 2025, on a Tuesday evening, I said to my mother, as casually as I could, "What if this year we make Thanksgiving a little bigger? Invite some family we haven't had over in a while?" I kept my voice light. I didn't say which side. I didn't say Pennsylvania. I set a spoon on the table. I kept my eyes on the soup. Her hand stopped. Just stopped. The air in the kitchen changed the way it does when a storm shifts. After a few seconds, looking down at the counter, she said, "Those people aren't from my world." She drew in a breath, then added, "Don't invite them." The words landed sharp. They were cold and straight, and they set deep. I heard myself ask, before I could soften it, "Those people? You mean Dad's family?" She didn't answer. She picked up the spoons I had set out and lined them up so their edges were even. Then she slid them back into the drawer. Her hands moved careful and exact, her face calm. That tidy motion only made the silence heavier. "Mom," I said, and I kept my voice gentle because I knew we were close to some ledge neither of us could see. "You never took me to see Dad's parents. Not once. Was it because of this? Because you feel this way?" Time stretched. The hum of the refrigerator sounded too loud. My mother lowered her eyes to her hands. She touched the edge of the table with her fingertips, as if she needed to feel something solid. A long moment went by. Then, in a small voice I rarely heard from her, she began to speak. She kept her eyes on her hands and said, very softly, "Going against the world isn't easy." Her voice was even, but it hit me like a weight. The kitchen was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint, steady tick of the wall clock. She lifted her gaze and met mine. And in that look, I saw a piece of the woman she was before I was born, young, stubborn, in love, and already paying for it. "When I told my people I was marrying your father," she said, "they cut me off. Not everyone, but enough." My older brother looked me straight in the face and said, "You're marrying beneath you." He meant to hurt me, and he did. For months, I walked into rooms and felt the air change. I was the girl who'd gone and thrown herself away. At holidays, there was a place I used to sit, and suddenly it belonged to nobody. Or, it belonged to silence. She lowered her eyes again. "Ray's name was not welcome. Your father's name was not welcome. I was told I'd made my bed. And then, when you were born, I heard what I'd already heard 10 times over. That I had ruined my future. That I'd made a mistake. My brother called me the family mistakes every time he wanted to watch me flinch. I didn't move. I didn't interrupt. There are stories you break if you touch them too soon," she went on. "But your father never blamed me. Not once. He took my hand and he didn't let go. We were so young. We were tired. But he never made me pay for their words." She swallowed. I loved that about him. I wanted to say it right away. He was gentle. He was steady. He was my father. But I sat still and held the edges of my chair. That night, after she went to bed, I lay awake and listened to the apartment breathe. I could hear the city's murmur through the old windows. I could hear a neighbor's late TV. And I could hear, under all that, a sharper sound, the way a line can cut even when you try not to touch it. "Not in my league. Those people aren't from my world." The words took up space in me, and every time I reached for air, I bumped against them. Old scenes rose like film played on a wall. The day of my father's funeral service, lilies sent over by the Fords, set down gentle at our door by a cousin I didn't know. My mother took one look and said, "We don't need those at the front of the house." She steered them to a back room as if they were something that might spill. When I was in middle school, a letter came in the mail with a return address I didn't recognize. My mother turned it over in her hands, read the sender's last name, and said, "You don't have to open that." We didn't talk about it again. I can see the stamp now. I can see the blue ink of the postmark. I can see my own small hands setting that envelope into a drawer and closing it, feeling something inside me go quiet on command. All of it linked up in a single chain. I saw the shape of it. My mother wasn't just avoiding discomfort. She was keeping a part of us outside the door and telling herself that was safety. She had been living as if cutting off the past was the only way to keep breathing. Maybe it was. Once. Maybe it saved her. But I was not saved by that same wall. I was hurt by it, so I made a choice. I would not grow up with my blood denied. I would not keep pretending that my father's family did not belong to me. I took out my phone. I scrolled to a number I had saved under Ray Ford. I sat there for a second, breathing slow, and then I pressed call. He picked up on the second ring. "Ainsley, that you?" "Hi, Uncle Ray." My voice sounded small, but I said what I meant to say. "Do you think the Fords could come down for Thanksgiving? If it works." "If you can." There was a soft, warm chuckle on his end, the sound of a man leaning back in a chair that knows him. "Honey, you say the word, we're there. We'll bring rolls. We'll bring pie. We'll bring a folding table if you need it." Something eased in me, a pressure I had kept in my chest for years. Just like that. Just with a yes. I promised to text details. I hung up. I sat very still, holding the phone like it was warm. The room was the same room. The lamp cast the same yellow circle on the floor. But I was not the same woman sitting in it. I told myself I would remember my mother's words. Not to hold a grudge, but to mark the day. This would be the hour where something began to change because I chose it. The next morning, I made breakfast like always. Scrambled eggs, wheat toast, a handful of grapes rinsed under the tap, coffee in the pot, strong and black. My mother came to the table without looking at me very much. Her face was blank and calm, the way it gets when she decides she's not going to let anything show. But her eyes had a held note to them, tight and brittle. I set her plate down. I poured her coffee. I sat across from her and took a breath. Then I asked, soft and straight, "When you married Dad, what was the hardest part?" Her hand paused on the mug. Just a second. Then she picked it up and said, eyes on the steam. "Standing up to everybody who told me no." She looked past me, toward the window. "You have to understand. In Charleston, the women in my family know everybody and everybody knows them. There's a way you're supposed to be. There's a way you're supposed to marry. Your father was not in that world, and I got told that to my face. Over and over. I got told I was embarrassing, that I didn't know my place, that I'd regret it." She set her cup down so gently it hardly made a sound. Maybe I did know my place. Maybe I decided to leave it. "And he was kind," I said, "because I needed that in the air too." She nodded once. "He never let go of my hand." A wet shine came to her eyes, and for a heartbeat I saw my parents at 25, standing at a courthouse counter with a paper ring of keys and a cheap bouquet, brave and scared and thinking love would be enough. "Then why," I asked, "do you treat Dad's family like you do?" She said nothing. And in that silence, I felt the truth. She survived by burning a bridge and never turning around. If she looked back now, the smoke would fill her lungs. If she admitted she had set fire to a thing that could have held us, she might fall apart. That night, the apartment stayed dim. The living room held a hush. I could hear her steps in the hall, going back and forth, back and forth. A woman pacing a boundary she drew long ago. I thought about the words she had used. Not in my league, and how they cut. I thought about what she was trying so hard to protect. Dignity. Order. Her own heart. And I asked myself what I was trying to break. Maybe not a person. Maybe a pattern. I went to my desk and opened a drawer. Inside was my father's old field notebook. The one with the grid paper and the soft leather cover worn thin at the edges. He used to write in it every night. Lists, measurements, little notes in his square engineer's hand. I turned the pages. There was an entry from the week my parents moved in. Together. Rent due on the 1st. The gas company. Police bathroom light. There was a page for the day I was born. A line that read, Ainsley is here. Black hair. Big lungs. Beautiful. Then, a year and a half later, in the simplest words, today she said, Daddy. I put my fingers against the letters as if I could feel the heat left in them. Tears came slow and steady and did not stop for a while. I whispered, Dad, I am trying. I am going to keep the family tied, at least from my side. I am going to make a table that fits us. Time passed. Leaves dropped and blew along the curb. 2 days before Thanksgiving, I pulled a cardboard box from the back of my closet. Inside was a set of hand-turned walnut bowls my grandfather had made in his shop decades ago and left for me in his will. Uncle Ray told me he had the matching set at his house and still used them. I lifted one bowl out of its paper and held it to the light. The wood was dark and smooth, the grain curving like a slow river. I set them on the counter and felt a kind of courage rise that had nothing to do with arguments and everything to do with care. On the evening of November 24, 2025, I sat at the dining table with a pen. My list lay open, tablecloth washed and pressed, turkey ordered, pies. Hannah's bringing pecan, I'll do pumpkin. Extra chairs, borrow from the neighbor. The last thing left was the names. I wrote Uncle Ray. I wrote Hannah. I wrote the cousins. My mother was at the sink, washing a mug, her shoulders set. The water stopped. She turned. She saw the list. She saw the names. Her face didn't change. She just said, flat and cool, don't invite them. I looked up. Why? She met my eyes. She spoke in the coldest voice I have ever heard from her. Not loud, not cruel, just absolute. They're not our kind of people. Not in my league. The word hung there. League. It carried a map of lines and ladders and gates. It carried a long history of who belongs and who does not. And it carried a shot straight at my heart. Because those not, our people were my father's people, and they were mine. They're Dad's family, I said. My voice came out thin. They can live how they like, she said, turning back to the sink. That's their business. But this is my house. I've kept this place decent. I've kept our good name. I won't have that upset. I felt it in my chest like a fist. I do know what she's kept and how hard. She carried me. She kept us afloat. But she also built that safety on top of a severed branch. And I was done pretending that didn't matter. Mom, I said, and my voice shook. If keeping a good name means cutting someone down, is that really the right name to keep? She didn't answer. I stood and walked to the shelf where my father's picture sits. He's smiling in that easy way he had, as if joy was a simple thing. I touched the edge of the frame. Dad, I said under my breath, I want to do right by your people too. That night I cooked alone and ate alone. My mother closed her bedroom door and kept the light on late. I stared at my plate and knew, down to the soles of my feet, that if I stayed the quiet daughter I had always been, I would grow into a woman who denies others to keep the peace. I could feel that future standing in the doorway, and I refused it. In the morning, in the clean light of early day, I told her, calm and plain, Mom, I'm not going to be the daughter who stays silent for someone else's comfort anymore. That was my line. That was my vow. And so, when Thanksgiving came, our quiet collision was going to reach a new turn. I set out the walnut bowls on the counter. I laid a clean cloth over them. I pulled recipes from a folder. I checked the oven temperature. Outside, the city kept moving. Buses, sirens, a man with a leaf blower in the pocket park across the street. Inside, I held a truth I was ready to live with. Love is wide, and families can be too, if someone is willing to open the door and stand there, steady, until the others arrive. As I rubbed one of my grandfather's walnut bowls to a quiet shine, the thought rose again, steady and sure. I want to give my father's memory and my father's blood a rightful place in this home. The next morning, my mother came into the kitchen. She sat down in front of the breakfast I'd made, set her hands around her coffee, and after a few seconds of silence, she asked, "Are you really inviting them? Your father's people?" "Yes," I said. "I've already reached out." "They said yes." "I see," she said. She didn't say more, but in that small "I see," I could hear an old confusion and a kind of quiet resignation, like someone lowering a heavy box to the floor and stepping back from it. That afternoon, I made the seating plan for Thanksgiving Day and checked the menu one last time. I wrote names on simple place cards in a clean block hand, the way my father showed me once. I set out serving platters. I double-checked the turkey order. I tasted the cranberry sauce. I planned a few extra dishes that carried family stories, lemon and black pepper, roast chicken, the way Uncle Ray likes it, and a pumpkin and cheddar bake my cousins loved when they were little. I could feel the weight of memories in each dish. I realized, maybe for the first time, how much feeling a person can put into the work of cooking. That evening, Mom watched TV in the den. I sat beside her, quiet for a minute, and then I asked, "Mom, did you ever go out to Pennsylvania with Dad, to see his folks?" She lowered her eyes. After a long pause, she opened her mouth and spoke slowly. "Just once." "You were too," she said. "How was it?" I asked. She drew in a breath. "Hard. Honestly, it was hard. Everybody felt so rough to me back then. We didn't share much to talk about. The whole time, I felt like I had been reduced to one small role. Somebody's wife, and nothing about me fit there. Not my words, not my clothes, not my sense of myself." I nodded. "But Mom," I said, soft and plain, "those were the first people who made me feel my own blood." She looked up quick, startled, then looked away. And still, she didn't shut her ears. That night I slept with a calm heart for the first time in a while. And then came Thanksgiving. Our front door was going to open again. The night before, I cleaned the guest room. Behind the sliding closet doors, tucked in a corner, an old glass vase lay on its side. When I pulled it out, I found a small picture frame half hidden behind it, dust on the edges like a thin sheet. Inside the frame, my dad and my mom stood side by side at their wedding. Dad wore a black tux and an easy smile. Mom wore a white dress, and her face had that tense light you see in photographs when someone is braver, caught, than they feel. For that one moment, there must have been love. There had to be. I wiped the frame. I set that picture on a shelf. I arranged fresh fall mums in the vase, gold and rust and white, bought that afternoon from the market on Main. By morning, a soft kind of tension hung in the house. In the kitchen, Mom moved quietly, simmering a pot of stock for the gravy. I laid out the appetizer plates and lined up the serving spoons. I folded napkins. The doorbell rang. I heard the small pause in my mother's hands, then the sound of her breath, then the steady scrape of her spoon moving again. I went to the door. I opened it. There stood Uncle Ray in a suit jacket and clean boots, and behind him my cousins, Hannah, her husband, the kids bouncing in the cold air, and two more cousins I'd only met in photos, smiling wide and a little nervous. "Ainsley," Ray said in his warm, low voice. "Look at you. Feels good to see you, sweetheart." I swallowed a swell of tears and stepped back. "Thank you for coming." I led them into the living room. Mom stood up. She took a small step forward and inclined her head. "Please," she said, her voice careful. "Make yourselves at home." The words touched something in me and set it moving. Too some to think. This was her effort. This was her reach. We found our places. Dishes lined the table. I carried my father's picture and set it in the middle, where I had cleared a space for it. "Dad's with us today," I said. Mom's eyes closed for a heartbeat. I saw the smallest nod. It felt like a reunion 20 years late. November 24, 2025. Thanksgiving afternoon. The house held a quiet alertness. Sunlight came in through the front windows and laid a soft bar of gold across. My father's picture. The dishes we had made and carried and set down added color to the room the way voices add life. For the first hour after Uncle Ray and the others arrived, the mood was easy. My cousins took their kids out to the small backyard to run off steam and throw a foam football. Uncle Ray handed Mom a tidy bag with a pretty bow homemade, rolls and a jar of apple butter, and told stories about the river near Harrisburg, and who had built a raft and who fell in. Mom smiled and answered with grace, but the stiffness under her smile didn't vanish. It sat there. It kept its shape. That difference in temperature, that mismatch in tone, grew heavier as the minutes passed. Evening came on. We filled our plates. We reached across one another with murmured pardon me's, settled in, and tried to be one table. We ate from white plates Mom had kept for company, the ones she never put in the dishwasher. We passed the pumpkin and cheddar bake. We carved turkey at the sideboard. We poured gravy and said, "Try this. Here. Take a little more." Then Uncle Ray spoke in a low voice that carried anyway. "Ainsley," he said, and he looked at me with eyes that shone. "It does my heart good to be here. Your dad would be smiling today. Back then, I never imagined we'd be invited into this house." A small sound rang out. My mother's fork had met her plate. I started to steer the talk away, but Uncle Ray wasn't done. "Maggie," he said, gentle as a hand to a sore spot, "I want to let the past be the past. After my brother died, we knew you were raising Ainsley alone, and we were grateful. We were. But it was lonely too. We reached out more than once. We didn't hear back." Mom looked down. She said nothing. The cousins went quiet. From the yard we could still hear a faint squeal of a child and the knock of that foam football against the fence, steady and far away, like a sound from another life. I spoke softly. "I'm sorry. I should have reached out sooner. I should have. But I'm glad you're here. Today means a lot." At that moment, Mom set her fork down. She lifted her face. "I hear you," she said. "I do. But I had my own reasons." Uncle Ray nodded. "We can listen," he said. "Tell us." Mom drew a breath and began to speak, as if she were pulling the words up from a deep, tight place. "I grew up in Charleston," she said, "in a family that cared about how you carried yourself. Manners, poise, appearances. There was a way to speak, and a way to be, and a way to marry. When I met your father," she went on, "I felt free for the first time in my life." Her eyes moved to the photo in the middle of the table. She looked back down at her hands. "But people around me didn't treat it like freedom. They treated it like a fall. A civil engineer from out of town? A road and bridge man? He'll drag you down," they said. They called it marrying beneath me. They meant to shame me. "I chose him anyway," she said. "Yeah, I did. I chose him. But that choice didn't lay out stairs for me. It cut away the ground. It gave me a cliff. When he died, I was left a widow who had made the wrong choice, or so I was told. My own people pulled back. They put distance between themselves and me, and I told myself one thing that day: I will not be looked down on again." Her words cut me in a way I had not expected. I saw it then. She had split the world in two to protect me. Safe people and unsafe people. Her side and his side. Anything that felt like the old shame got locked out. She built a wall and called it safety. And then she taught me to sit quietly in the safe half. Uncle Ray took a slow breath. He said, almost in a whisper, "We were family, Maggie." "We always were. After my brother died, if you and Ainsley were okay, that was enough for us. We didn't want to take anything from you. We just wanted to be in your lives." Time moved like thick honey for a few minutes. Then Mom stood, went to the kitchen, and came back with a square tin in her hands. "These are chocolate walnut brownies," she said. "They were his favorite. For years I baked them and ate them alone. Today I'd like to share them with you." Something eased. Not all the way. Not by a mile. But a notch. A small slack in the rope. I took a breath and sent a few words into the quiet space where I keep my father. "Dad," I said in my heart, "your people and your picture are in one room." But the peace that settled wasn't complete. After we cleared our plates and passed the brownies, Uncle Ray handed over a small box wrapped in brown paper and twine. A little something, he said. Just some coffee from a roaster near us. And a candle. Hannah poured. Mom held the box. She hesitated. Then she took it and nodded. Thank you, she said. I appreciate it. But this house isn't ready to accept everything yet. I heard her. I nodded too. It was the truth as she knew it. We stacked plates in the sink. We wrapped leftovers. We hugged in the doorway with cautious arms and real hands. Out on the street, the night air carried the smell of cold leaves and far-off smoke. The cousins buckled kids into car seats. Uncle Ray squeezed my shoulder and said, "You call? You hear? You call." "I will," I said. When the door shut, the house went quiet again. The mums on the shelf held their color. The walnut bowls were empty and clean. My father's face, framed in the middle of the room, seemed to rest easier than it had in years. We were not finished. Not by any measure. But a door had opened, and we had stood there in it without turning away. That, for one day, was enough. Yes. This was the beginning. Years of distance do not bridge in a day. But today, we sat in the same room. We ate the same meal. We breathed the same air. That was enough. That was a first real step. After everyone left and the front door closed, my mother washed the last plates by hand. She stood at the sink a long time. The house grew quiet. Then she spoke, without turning around. "Ainsley, thank you. If it hadn't been for you, I couldn't have opened this door at all." I went to her. I set my hand on her back, small, steady. "Mom, thank you too. Today you handed me the key to the door you kept shut." And just like that, our Thanksgiving came to a close. It was the first time in 20 years that our family table had opened. That night, after our visitors had gone and the rooms were dim again, Mom and I sat side by side on the couch. No TV. No music. The quiet had weight, but it was a gentle weight. Not a silence that bites. A silence that holds. Mom's voice came soft, almost as if she were talking to herself. "Back when your father was still alive, once. Just once, his side of the family came here. They brought a dish." They laughed. I remember standing in my own house and feeling like I did not belong. Like I had no language. Like I was on the wrong side of every joke. But today, being in the same space, seeing faces loosen and people smile, I was a little jealous. I took her hand. I looked at her profile. I could see the girl she had been, brave and unsure, holding herself together with pride. "If you could feel even a little envy," I said, "then something in you has already started to change." She closed her eyes and smiled in a shy, surprised way. It was quick. It was real. The next morning, I cleaned up the dining room and lifted the white plates back onto their shelf. In the living room, on the bookcase, my father's photo kept watch, his square jaw, his easy half smile, his eyes looking at something just past the camera as if he saw a better way to brace a beam. The light hit the glass. For the first time, that smile looked a little proud to me. Before I went back to my room, I sat down cross-legged on the rug and set the frame in front of me. I lowered my head. No ritual. No script. Just the plain talk of a daughter in the quiet. "Dad, thank you for being here." Our family finally found its way into one room. On the low table beneath his picture, Mom had set a small saucer with 2 maple sugar candies and lit a slender, cedar-scented candle. The warm smell lifted through the room, clean and steady, like a line drawn without a shake. The next day, Mom woke early and made my favorite breakfast. She whisked eggs with cheddar and folded in chives, careful and quick. The pan hissed. The coffee steamed. I ate a bite. Then I went ahead and asked, "Mom," I said, "will you come out to Pennsylvania with me next time?" She looked up with a little start. Then, after a long second, she nodded once and said, very quietly, "It still takes some courage. But, I'll think about it." That one answer was enough. Not a refusal, but "I'll think about it." It felt like a small crack in a long closed door. And from that crack, I could feel light. Later that day, I pulled my journal out of a drawer and uncapped a pen. I put down the date. November 25, 2025. The day after Thanksgiving. Mom's voice sounded softer today. I could feel the thread Dad left us beginning to untie its knots. When I closed the notebook, I knew. This wasn't about repairing the past. This was about building a future. One step calling up the next. I turned back to the photo and spoke again, a whisper more than a voice. Thank you, Dad. We're moving forward. A little at a time. But we are moving. Then I stood and set my heart to meet the new morning. On November 28, 2025, Mom and I boarded an Amtrak train at Penn Station and headed west toward Harrisburg. A few days after Thanksgiving, Mom had called me and said, "If it's just for a little while, I'll go. I want to see your uncle's place." Her words were calm. Her tone said this was not small for her. It was not small for me either. The sky was pale and clouded, the kind of gray that makes colors look honest. Out the window, the city slipped away. Warehouses turned to trees. Yards spread out. The land opened, and with it, something in my chest. We passed fields the color of old coins and creeks that showed bright through the brush. The sight pulled at deep pieces of my childhood and lifted them like shells. From the bottom of the water, Mom watched the view with her hands folded in her lap. The last time I went out to Pennsylvania was the funeral, she said. I nodded. Today will be a different day. When we stepped off the train, Uncle Ray stood there in a worn suit jacket and a fresh shave, his face open, his eyes kind. "Look at you," he said, and his voice was warmth. "I'm glad you're here." Mom reached out her hand. He took it in both of his. For a second, all three of us held on. At the house, the front door opened onto a small entry with a narrow table. On it, a hand-lettered sign said, "Welcome," and next to it, in a mason jar, someone had set a few wild asters, ragged, simple, beautiful. Something rose in my throat. "Thank you," I said. "Mom, look." She nodded, quiet, and slipped off her coat. She straightened her shoulders and walked down the hall with a careful grace. That told me she was not retreating. By noon, the kitchen and dining room hummed. Cousins showed up with aluminum pans and foil-covered dishes. Laughter landed and stayed. We spread food across the table and pulled up chairs, scooting, making room. The talk started small weather, the drive-in, how the creek had risen last week, and then, inch by inch, found a fuller voice. At first, Mom kept her answers short. But as time went on, she began to talk. She told a story I'd never heard. When Ainsley was little, she caught every cold there was, she said, almost laughing. There were nights I took her temperature 10 times. Your brother would get up, wet a washcloth, sit at the edge of the bed, and press it to her forehead like it was something precious. A woman across from me, Aunt Carol, Ray's older sister, smiled and shook her head in that fond way people do when old truth is alive between them. Our brother didn't say much, she said, but he was tender with his own. I watched Mom slip into the circle of talk as if a tight jacket had eased a seam. Her voice started to carry a little further. Her face looked less braced. Her hands opened while she spoke. "Oh," I thought, letting out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. This is what it's supposed to feel like. This is the shape of family. This is home. After we ate, the room cooled and softened. A few folks drifted to the porch. Kids went to the yard to run. I found myself walking down the hall to the front parlor, the quiet room where Uncle Ray keeps the old things that matter. On the mantel there, Grandma Ruth's urn sat next to framed photos, one of my grandfather in a shop apron, one of my father with sawdust on his sleeve, one of my grandparents on their wedding day under a tree. A small lamp warmed the wood. I stood still, folded my hands, and set my eyes on my father's face. "Dad, I came with Mom today." I heard a soft step behind me. Mom came in and knelt beside me on the rug. Her voice, when it came, was barely there. "I think it's been 20 years since I stood in this room," she said. I didn't speak. I let the quiet be. Then Mom's hand moved and rested on mine. "Ainsley," she whispered, "thank you. If you hadn't asked, I could not have come back." I kept my voice steady. "You came, Mom. Dad's proud." "I know he is." Later, as we put on our coats, Uncle Ray handed my mother a small paper bag folded neat at the top. "These are the holiday letters your brother sent every year," he said. We kept them all. I have always figured they were for Ainsley someday. Mom took the bag as if it were made of something delicate, and then she brought it to her chest and closed her eyes. On the ride back, the train rocked in a slow, forgiving way. I opened the bag. Inside was a stack of cards and typed letters with small family updates. Some were on heavy cream paper, some on plain white with neat black ink. I lifted the top one. "We're doing well, the three of us." Another, "Ainsley started kindergarten this fall." Another, "I'm grateful for my wife more than these words can say." The handwriting, when he added a line by hand, was crisp and square. The tone was plain and honest. Every line felt like a steady hand on a rail. Love, simple and true, ran through the pages. Mom stared at the letters. Then she spoke, as if thinking out loud. I never once thought he sat down and wrote a line like, "I'm grateful for my wife." I never let myself think it. She touched the edge of a page. But he did. He saw me. I took her hand and held it. "Mom, you were never alone." Not then. Not now. That night, after we got home, Mom went to the living room. She knelt in front of my father's photo. The candle from the other day sat on the shelf. She lit it and watched it catch. Then she bowed her head and spoke in a low, even voice. "I'm sorry," she said. "I kept your people at a distance. I thought I had to. I thought it kept us safe. But Ainsley opened my heart today. I stood in the kitchen and let the tears come, quiet, without trying to stop them. Her words were an apology, yes. They were a kind of truce. But more than that, they were her own rescue. That night, I wrote in my diary again. Mom faced the past today. I witnessed it. There was a moment when Dad and Mom were tied again, just for a breath, and it was enough to change me. I closed the book and laid my palm on it. You can start over at any time, I thought. You can, at 50, at 60, at any age. You can turn your body toward the person you love and say, "I'm here now." A few days later, on a spare, bright afternoon, I stopped by the public library my dad used to visit when he had jobs out this way. As a child, he'd taken me in more than once, his big hand around mine, the hush like a warm coat, the rows of books steady as a street of old trees. In the back, off the main reading room, there's a small local history corner with glass display cases that change every season. I wandered over and leaned in to read a placard. Donated by Kenneth Ford, Susquehanna. River watershed survey maps and design notebooks. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The words stood there in clean type, calm as a level on a bench. In the case lay his notebooks. The same grid paper, the same square hand, the same neat columns of numbers and lines he'd used at our kitchen table when I was small. One page showed a bridge span drawn in pencil, triangles braced just so. Another held a map of the river's bend, notes on floodplain soil. A date in the corner from the year before I was born. I set my fingertips to the glass. "Dad," I said without sound, "your work stayed. Your name stayed. And we are learning how to stay, too." I let my breath go slow and even. Out in the main room, a page turned. A chair scraped. The ordinary sounds of a library on a weekday afternoon moved. Around me, soft and sure. Then I turned and walked into the light. It was my father's name. Set beside it, on a neat little placard, was a heading that read, "The work of a civil engineer who helped keep our community safe," and below that, a short account of the flood control projects and drainage plans he had designed for the county. A photograph showed one of his early survey teams standing on a muddy riverbank. Another showed a clean line drawing of a levee cross-section with careful pencil notes along the edge. His square handwriting, his careful eye. I lost my words for a moment. I reached into my coat pocket for my phone, meaning to take a picture so I could send it to Uncle Ray later. Just then, a staff member in a navy vest came over, kind but cautious, the way people are around glass cases and quiet rooms. "Excuse me," she whispered. "Are you Mr. Ford's daughter? You look so much like him." I stared at her. I felt my throat tighten. Then I nodded. "Yes," I said. "I am." Her face softened. "He used to teach disaster preparedness workshops here," she said. It's been more than 10 years now, but I remember. He was steady, very patient, always kind. I felt the sting behind my eyes and pressed my lips together. I managed a small thank you. I stood there until I could breathe again. The glass felt cool under my fingertips. My father's name felt bright and solid in the air around us. That night, back home, I told my mother about the display. I set a hand on the edge of the kitchen counter to ground myself, still a little shaky with the wonder of it. She listened, and then lowered her eyes. Her lashes were wet when she looked up again. "He never said a word about that," she whispered. I smiled a little. Dad was modest, but he carried pride the right way. Quiet. True, he lived like that. Mom let out a breath and nodded, small, as if something in her had found a tiny landing and rested there. "I wish I had known sooner," she said. I reached across and took her hand. "We know now," I said. "That's what matters. We can't change the past, but we can change how we live from here." That weekend, out of the blue, Mom said, "I'd like to call your dad's family myself. The Pennsylvania relatives. Do you have Uncle Ray's number?" I did. I handed her my phone and watched her punch in the digits with careful fingers. Then hold the phone with both hands the way you do when the thing you're holding matters. Her voice, shy at first, turned warm as the talk found its shape. She said, "I hope I'm not calling at a bad time, and, yes, it's me, Maggie." And then, with a quick, almost girlish lilt, "We went out there after Thanksgiving with Ainsley. It was good." She laughed once, breathy and new. It was more than good. That call was the first step over an old line of refusal, his step into open ground. When I went back to my desk that night and lifted a manuscript, I felt a small vow settle in me like a stone set firm in riverbed. I will make this home a place where memory does not break. I will make it a place where we start again and tie the thread back to the other end. Later, after I closed my journal, I did something I had never done. I brewed tea and sat with my mother on the couch. We watched a quiet show and said little. When she laughed, just a soft laugh at some silly line, I knew. This was the start of our family's second chapter. The next week, I asked her if she wanted to go to the cafe around the corner. She usually turned me down. She liked to cook at home. She liked to keep her routines. But she looked at me, and then she smiled a small yes. "Just this once," she said. "It might be nice." We took a table on the patio under a little overhang. The air was cool. The tea was hot and sweet. For a while we sat in an easy quiet. Then Mom began to talk. "When I was young, I worried too much about what people thought," she said. "I believed in what I was told. A proper home, a proper life, a proper person. I don't know who wrote those rules, but I followed them. Maybe I set aside what mattered to me because of it." I nodded. "Was your happiness inside that proper box?" I asked, gentle as I could make it. She blinked, taken aback. She looked into her tea, as if the steam held a hard truth. "Maybe not," she said. "Maybe it wasn't there at all." Hearing that, I felt something lift in my chest like a latch released. "Then let's choose what relaxes the heart," I said. "From now on." She smiled, small and real, and took a sip. "Ainsley," she said, "when I'm with you, it's easier to hear what my heart is saying." I didn't think a day like this would ever come. I didn't even let myself imagine it. I squeezed my hands together under the table. I kept my voice steady. "It's here now," I said. "That's enough." After that, Mom changed in small ways a person could feel. In the late afternoon, we took short walks to the little park by the church, where the light goes soft and the grass holds the day's warmth. Now and then she stopped to point out a wildflower by the fence. Queen Anne's lace, goldenrod, a bit of clover. "That used to grow in my parents' backyard," she said. "I never knew the names back then. I just knew I liked how they made the air smell in summer." Her face, turned to the flowers, looked younger than I had seen it in years. The child she had been was right there. I fixed that image inside me, careful and clear. One afternoon she brought out old photo albums, the heavy kind with sticky pages and cellophane sheets that lift with a whisper. "Ainsley, I'd like to put these in order," she said. "It's time to respect our memories. Not hide them." Inside were pictures of the three of us smiling wide at a picnic. Dad in a flannel shirt with his arm around Mom, me in a bright costume. Holding a plastic pumpkin on Halloween night, me at a summer fair with cotton candy, pink and cloud, soft, stuck to my lip. Every page held warmth I had half forgotten. It rose and spread. What were you feeling then? I asked when we paused at a picture of me in pigtails, missing a front tooth, grinning like the sun. Mom kept her eyes on the page. After a long breath, she said, "I was scared a lot, but your smile held me up." That's how I kept going. My throat burned. I set my hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," I said. That was all. It was enough. The meaning that passed between us in that quiet didn't need a name. A tie that had almost snapped years ago was being retied, strand by strand, in a new way. Not the old way. A kinder way. A way that could hold. We closed the album and sat there with our hands on its cover. We looked ahead, and I felt hope that fit in my palms, small and bright and real. In December of 2025, after a day of translation work, I opened my social feed without thinking much about it. I had posted a few photographs from Thanksgiving, nothing fancy. A shot of Uncle Ray laughing with Hannah over the sink. A candid of my mother's profile as she looked at my father's photograph. A soft smile on her mouth that I had not seen in years. Under the pictures, I had written, "The first time my mother and I looked at my roots, together. You can reconnect anytime." I didn't expect much, but the comments rolled in. "This is beautiful. I'm going to call my mom tonight. Lean over here. I want to be brave like you, Ainsley." Some told their own stories. "We've had a wall in our family too," one wrote. "I've wanted to climb over it for a long time." I sat still, surprised. I hadn't known how many people were trying to reconnect. Not until then. That night I showed a few of the comments to Mom. "Looks like we nudged a few strangers in the right direction," I said. She read in silence. Then she smiled, small and sure. "The old me would have said, 'What good does this do?'" she said. "But now I think these are gentle ripples, like you called them. They go out. They touch shores you can't see. Gentle ripples." She said that often now. It had become one of her phrases. I loved it. A few days later, the director of our neighborhood community center emailed me. One of the librarians had passed along my name. "We're hosting a small event in January," she wrote. "A gathering called Talking Family Memories. Would you be willing to join as a guest and share a little of your story?" I hesitated. Talking about our family in public felt like standing under a bright light with my hands open. But then I thought of Mom's new, steady smile. I thought of the gentle ripples. "Okay," I wrote back. "I'll do it." The new year came. On January 15, I walked into the community room with my mother at my side. The space was simple. A carpeted floor, a coffee urn on a long table, a circle of folding chairs, a vase of winter branches in the corner. About 15 people gathered. They looked up and met us with quiet, warm eyes. I stood. I took one slow breath. Then I began. "My name is Ainsley Ford," I said. "I'm here because the phrase, 'family memory,' called me across the room." I told the plain story. How my father, Kenneth, was steady and tender. How he taught me the value of triangles and clean lines. How he died when I was 9. How my mother, Maggie, lived with pride and iron will and a deep wound that told her to lock the past outside. How I found my father's people and learned my own blood. How Thanksgiving opened our door. How a library display with his name in clear type made me cry in public and smile anyway. How Mom called my uncle and said hello like it was a first time. I said what it felt like to live half-walled. I said what it felt like to lay the wall down. Now and then, while I spoke, my mother made a small sound of agreement, a soft yes. She held my hand between both of hers. Her palm was warm and dry. The simple weight of that hand steadied me more than any note I had written. At the end, I finished with the truest thing I knew right then. "I used to think memory belonged to the past," I said. "Now I think it's a bridge to the future. As long as someone is willing to walk that bridge with you, you can cross. You can reconnect, You can try again." When I finished speaking, the room went still. It wasn't an awkward quiet. It was the kind that follows when people are carrying something tender together and don't want to drop it. You could hear the soft hiss of the coffee urn in the corner. You could hear a chair leg shift, and then, in the second row, an older woman lifted her hand. Her eyes were wet. She said in a voice that trembled just a little, "I haven't heard from my son since he left home almost 50 years ago. We never found our way back. But listening to you today, I want to try again. I'm going to write him a letter." I felt the words go through me. I nodded. I couldn't trust my voice not to break right then. But inside, something answered her. Yes, the gentle ripples are reaching someone. After the event ended and people drifted out, my mother took my elbow. We stepped into the hallway where the light was softer and the air a little cooler. She leaned close and whispered, "Ainsley, thank you. Because of you, I think I might like myself a little more today." I laughed and cried in the same breath. I squeezed her hand tight. She squeezed back. We walked home under a sharp winter sky. You could see our breath. The sidewalks held a brightness that only comes on cold evenings. Even so, my chest felt warm. Not, "I forgive my mother," warm. Something truer. Something steadier. Not forgiving my mother, but being forgiven together. Both of us walking toward the same open place. That was a new path. I had not known it existed until then. The following week, an envelope arrived from the community center. Inside was a stack comments, notes, short letters, all written by the folks who had come. Line after line said things like, "I found courage," and "I want to face my family again." Those words were like a fire in a hearth. They gave off real heat. I handed the packet to Mom. She sat at the table and read one page at a time. She took off her glasses once, dabbed at the corner of her eye, and kept going. She murmured, "People can change, can't they? Even someone like me." I nodded. "These notes came because you changed, Mom. Because you opened up." After that, small shifts began to show up in the places where my mother lived her life. At her boutique on Main Street, the little storefront she'd carried through lean years and decent years, she started telling longtime customers with a shy smile, "My daughter has a book coming soon. She speaks at the community center." Right? She didn't shrink from my father's name anymore. Every so often, in an ordinary, easy tone, she would say, "Kenneth used to love this kind of fabric," or "Kenneth swore by a sturdy seam." Hearing his name slide into our days felt like windows opening in a house that had been shut too long. Then one afternoon she said, "Ainsley, I'd like to go back to your father's grave. Would you take me?" Her voice was simple. Her eyes were steady. I was surprised for half a second. Then I nodded. Yes, I would. On a clear, wind-bright weekend, we rode west again. We drove up a narrow road outside Harrisburg to a small cemetery on a low hill. Yeah, the ground was clean. The air smelled like cold grass. A stand of older maples made a soft fence with their bare gray arms. On the way from the car, Mom talked in a quiet flow. She told me a story I had never heard. "Before we got married," she said, "your dad wrote me a letter. The first one he ever wrote. I still have it folded, tucked deep in a drawer. He wrote in that square hand of his. He said he wanted a life where we sat on the same side of the table when we had a problem. Not across from each other glaring. On the same side. That's what he wrote." She laughed once, gentle and surprised at her own memory. For a moment, looking at her profile as she walked, I saw the younger woman she had been, hope in the lines of her face, fear too, but a braver kind than before. We stood at my father's stone. Maggie put her palms together the way she does when she needs a quiet that goes deeper than words. She closed her eyes. I stood beside her. I looked at his name. Kenneth Ford. The dates. The small engraved line below his name that reads, "Loved steady, loved true." I bowed my head and spoke so low it hardly counted as sound. "Dad, thank you. We found our way back to being a family." On the drive home, the car hummed and the miles rolled out. Mom looked straight ahead and said, almost to herself, "From now on, I want to take care of our future, not our past." I held that line like a warm stone in my hand. From now on, choose the future. Not out of denial, out of courage. That night, sitting at my desk with the window cracked and the city's winter air coming in, a quiet conviction grew inside me. It's not blood alone that ties a family back together. It's the will to choose again. To choose one another again. That is what stitches us back. My name is Ainsley Ford. I'm 31. I live in New York City and make my living as a freelance translator. This past year changed me. Quietly, yes, but fully. I faced my mother. I walked back into my father's life and into my own. I learned how to look at myself without sliding away. Conversation, the thing I feared for so long, has become part of my days. It feels like my heart finally learned how to breathe. As spring edged closer, rain on the windows, a faint green on the trees in the park, I made a decision. I'm going to share this story in a bigger way. The spark came from that community center gathering. The faces, the small nods, the notes that came in the mail, my mother's changes. All of it asked me to take one more step. I reached out to a tiny independent press here in the city. I told the editor I had an essay collection taking shape, my story, our story, and asked if she would read a sample. She said she would. So I wrote. I called the book Beyond the Divide, How We Became a Family Again. Writing it wasn't easy. Every time I sat down and typed out a hard piece of the past, the ache rose like it had been waiting for me. Grief came back. Anger did too. Some afternoons the tears made the letters blur. I stepped away, washed my face, came back, and kept going. At the same time, I could feel the work doing a good thing in me. Each page settled a little weight. Each paragraph loosened a tight place in my chest. Memory becomes part of the future when you speak it. That belief carried me. When the book came out, just a modest run, nothing grand. The response startled me. Emails started to land in my inbox. DMs came in from strangers. A few hand-addressed notes showed up at my mailbox, written on cardstock and plain paper and the backs of grocery lists. People said, "I think your book said what I couldn't say to my family." People said, "I took a breath and called my mom today." People said, "I stayed quiet for 20 years. I don't want to do that anymore." I read each note slowly. I let the words rest. I saved everyone. Then, on a Wednesday, an email came with the subject line, "Speaking invitation." "Would you be willing to give a talk?" it asked. We're a regional women's support network that serves communities across the state. Our spring gathering is coming up. Our theme is turning unspoken pain into a bridge. We would be honored to have you join us. I sat with it for a night. I made tea. I looked out at the lights in the windows across the street. The next morning I wrote back. Yes, I would. On the day of the event, I stood in a hall with more than 100 people. The stage wasn't large. There was a row of folding chairs and a simple lectern. That was enough. My hand shook when I took the microphone, not much, just enough to notice. I breathed once, slow, the way my father taught me to do before a big test when I was small. Some of you, I said, have been hurt by the word family. Some of you know what it feels like to stand close to someone and feel far away anyway. I've felt that too. Heads nodded. A few eyes closed and opened again like a yes. I lived for years believing I was the unchosen side, I said. I thought my father's blood was something my mother had to hide to survive. I thought she was ashamed of it. Of me. But the truth was different. We were both hurt. We were both quiet. That's all. The silence did the rest. As I said it, I saw a young woman in the front row. She held her hands tight and cried without hiding it. Her face looked like my own at 25. I kept my voice even. Silence protects sometimes, I said. It can be a blanket against a hard wind. But it also pushes love away. It keeps doors shut. Well, so I am choosing to speak. The day, here, with you. Applause rose like a wave. Not loud or wild, just sure. After that day, I made a simple promise to myself. Once a month, I would sit in a small circle at our community center's book club and tell this story again. I would listen to other stories too, We would read. We would talk. We would try not to rush anything that needed time. One afternoon, in our kitchen, Mom said, "Ainsley, you really have changed. There was a time you were afraid to say what you felt." I smiled. "You opened that door for me, Mom. When you changed, I found the nerve to be honest." She looked away, embarrassed the way she gets when pride rises in her and she doesn't know what to do with it. Then she smiled. The pride stayed. In early spring, I took my mother back to my father's hometown again. This time we didn't just sit around a table. We walked the streets he'd known as a boy. The houses were wooden and old. Paint flaked in places, but the porches were swept. The fields around town were calm, green-brown, ready for planting. The faces that met us at Uncle Ray's door were familiar now. Warm. Steady. "Thank you for coming back," Uncle Ray said, a hand on the door jamb. Voice low and full. Mom bowed her head and wiped her eyes with the side of her hand. "Thank you for having me," she said. I watched her. In my chest, I made a silent vow. I will carry both sides of my blood with pride. I will not diminish either one to make the other comfortable. I will be whole. On the train home, the car rocked in that slow, forgiving way. The sky outside was clear. Mom nodded off, her shoulder against mine. I took my notebook out and wrote one line. "We can start over as many times as it takes. We can't change what already happened. But we can tie today to tomorrow with care." And if you, reading this, are living at a distance from someone you still call family, if you're standing at a closed door, unsure, try a small word. Try one sentence out loud. Not to blame, not to win, to save your own heart. That one line might do something soft and brave. It might unhook a latch on someone else's side. It might open a door you thought was sealed for good. From there, step by step, you can walk together again. Months passed in that spirit. A new season came in, and I could feel the change in our house like a warmer current in a river. Mom would call me into the kitchen and hold up a recipe card in my father's. Hand chili with cumin, cornbread with honey found in a box I'd never seen. We made the dishes together, and then wrote our notes in the margins like, another voice joining the old ones. Sometimes she would stand by the front window and say, "Kenneth would have liked this light." Sometimes she would smile at me in the grocery store when we passed the bakery rack and say, "He always picked the cinnamon rolls with extra glaze," and then put one in the cart. At my desk, I kept working, contract by contract. I turned down my music. I let the city's hum be my background. I answered emails from readers who found themselves in our story, and I answered them the same way. Every time. "Thank you, you're not alone. You can try again." I kept speaking once a month. I learned to keep my sentences short and plain. I learned to slow down so older listeners could walk with me through the story, step by steady step. I learned that pauses are part of speech too. They let the heart catch up. In late spring, that women's network asked me back for a panel. I sat on stage with a social worker, a family therapist, and a retired teacher. We took questions. A woman stood and asked, "What if the person you need to talk to is gone?" The therapist spoke about ritual and letters sent to the past. The teacher talked about telling the truth out loud even if no one hears. When it was my turn, I said, "My father is gone, but I talked to him anyway." In the kitchen. At the library when I saw his name. At his grave. It helps. When I sat down that night with my mother on our couch, she leaned her head on my shoulder the way I used to lean on hers when I was small. "You're doing good work," she said. "Oh, are you?" I said. She laughed softly. "We both are." That is how change came to us. Not in one big wave that knocks you flat. In slow laps at the shore. In gentle ripples that keep widening until, one day, you look up and see a different shape to the water. And if you're standing there now, at your own shore, listening, maybe today is the day you say one small thing. Maybe that's how your change begins. I'm Ainsley Ford. This is the story of how I chose to reconnect. How I chose to tie our family back together, thread by thread. Thank you for reading and for listening with patient hearts. Your time here matters to me more than I can say.